Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Simla Village Folktales by Alice Elizabeth Dracott. In the first story, the husband has married a foolish wife who has trouble understanding his meanings, but she wins in the end. And in the second story, we have a version of The Brave Little Tailor, but with an Indian twist. Okay, let's begin. Bey Huslo. Bey Huslo was a very extravagant woman, who was always being found at fault by her husband, who gave her examples of other women who were thrifty in their habits and who saved money, and who helped to make and build up their husbands' homes. On hearing this, Bey Huslo took a pickaxe and began digging here and there like a mason. Her husband asked what she was doing, and she replied, "Trying to build you a house." He tried to explain that that was not what was literally meant, and explained again the duties of a wife. When a good wife falls short of supplies, she borrows 2 kutras full of flour from her neighbor, and thus saves herself the expense of buying any large quantity. That night Bey Huslo, who had taken this saying literally, borrowed 2 small earthen vessels, and breaking them into small pieces, put them on the fire to cook. Her husband heard the sound as they grated against the cooking pot, and asked her what she was cooking that made such a noise. But he was very angry indeed when she told him, and scolded her roundly. He told her that she was perfectly useless, and that while he had to go about without clothes, other women were able to spin and weave. She replied that if he had only given her some wool, she could do the same. The man was delighted and gave her some wool, so she took it to the pond and told the frogs and toads to weave it into cloth for her. After some days her husband asked if the cloth was ready, and she said, "I gave it to the frogs and toads to weave for me, and I have found that they have not done so." Then her husband was very angry indeed, and said, "Senseless one, have you ever heard of frogs and toads spinning cloth? Go out of my house this moment." And with that he turned her out, and she went and climbed up into a peepul tree. Soon after, some camels came by that way, and as they stretched out their necks and ate at the branches, Bey Huslo called out, "Go away! I will not go with you. I will only go when my husband comes to fetch me." But as the camels had only come to eat, and not to fetch her, they made no reply, and went away. After this, a dog began to bark at her, but she said again, "Go away! I will not go with you. I will only go with my husband." When night fell, some thieves sat sharing their spoils under the tree, and Bey Huslo felt so frightened that she fell off and dropped into their midst. The thieves did not know what to make of it, and ran away, leaving their stolen property behind. Bey Huslo soon gathered it up and returned to her husband. "Here," she said, "is more than enough for you and for me. We will now live at our ease, and I will have no housekeeping to do, so that you can no longer call me a worthless wife." The end. Okay, and story number 2. The story of Panch Maar. There was once a weaver who had the habit of slapping his face to kill any flies that settled upon it, and it was rumored that he killed 5 at each blow. So he got the name Panch Maar, which means a killer of 5. People did not know that this name applied to flies, but thought the weaver was a brave and strong man, able to kill 5 of his enemies at one blow, so that he gained a reputation for bravery. One day the Raja of that place heard some enemies were coming in force to attack his capital. All the fighting men were required to go out and meet them on the morrow, so Panch Maar received notice to be in readiness also. Now, he had never touched a weapon in his life, and he was horribly frightened at the very idea, so he made up his mind to run away during the night. He saddled his donkey, and taking 2 large millstones, set out on his journey. But as he was passing the enemy's camp, and arrived at a hill just a little above it, the donkey began to kick and to bray, and the 2 stones rolled down the hill into the enemy's camp with a great noise. They thought an army was after them and became terror-stricken, so that in the darkness and panic which ensued, many of them were killed. Panch was greatly delighted at his good luck, and instead of running away, returned to his home. The next morning when the soldiers came to call him out to fight the enemy, he very proudly asked, "What enemy? Did I not go out at night and kill hundreds of our enemies and drive the rest away?" True enough, there was now no camp to be seen, and several dead men were found on the spot. So Panch reputation as a brave man spread far and wide, and he was handsomely rewarded by the Raja. Some days after, news came that a tiger was prowling about, and a brave man was required to go out that night and kill it. Who was as brave as Panch So he was supposed to go, but when he heard this, he nearly died of fright, and made up his mind that he would run away. So when darkness fell, he crept out, and caught his donkey by the ear, and led it to the stable, and there tied it to a post, to wait till he was ready to get on its back. But when he returned with a light, what was his surprise to find it was not its donkey, but the tiger that he had led by the ear and tied to the post. Such brave conduct from a mortal to a wild beast had so amazed the tiger that it was too frightened to resist, and so there it remained till morning, and Panch was thought to be the bravest man alive. Next morning he got up early and went out into the field near his house, and there he suddenly came face to face with the fierce eyes and grinning teeth of a jackal. His other bravery was by mistake, but this was a reality, and so frightened was he that he fell down and died on the spot. The end. In the first story, I love that the wife took things so literally, but still ended up wealthy in the end. You know, we have stories with the foolish husband, the foolish wife. And this one was just nice that, oops, she fell down and got a whole bunch of riches. And the second story was, it was the brave little tailor, but with Indian style. And him dying at the end was just such a interesting twist. I thought it was fun. The podcast Shoutout today is to the Philippine Campfire Stories. It is a podcast for stories and myths and legends and true horror from the Philippines, narrated in Tagalog. Now, for those who don't know me, I don't know how to speak much Tagalog. But I've spoken with Earl, and I've heard some stories, and I know I have a few Pinoy listeners. I'm also a huge fan of promoting voices from inside cultures. So rather than me talking about Filipino culture, I'm going to recommend that you go and listen to Earl. And if you like his podcast as much as I do, go and give him a listen, a like, and a review. Salamat po, Earl. And the listener shout-out is to a very cool place that I very much hope to visit someday, Tbilisi, Georgia. According to Georgian lore, the city was founded in the 5th century by King Vakhtang of Iberia, after watching a pheasant he was hunting fall into the hot springs and die. The city's name references the hot springs in the city, which alone could bring me to visit there. The city has been under the rule of the Persians, Russians, and Mongolians at one point or another. It looks like a gorgeous city, and I would sure love to visit. And a huge thanks to Gio for helping me with the pronunciation. So I say to my listeners in Tbilisi, Ugrmesi Madloba and Zili Nabisa. Big thanks, and sleep tight.